I wasn't supposed to be at that cafe. Not really. It was one of those corner places you pass a dozen times and never step inside. But that day I had nowhere else to be, and my phone felt heavier with every unsent message in it. So I pushed through the door. The place was quiet. Two students hunched over laptops, a man in a suit reading yesterday's paper. The air smelled of burnt espresso and wet umbrellas. I ordered the cheapest thing on the menu and sat near the window, pretending to scroll. That's when she walked in. She had that composed way of moving that made you think she'd been here before, even if she hadn't. Mid-40s, hair pulled back loose, still damp from the rain. She carried a folded newspaper like it belonged to her, like people still did that. I noticed her before I realized why. Maybe it was the way she scanned the room, then landed her eyes on me, noticing me in a way strangers don't. A flick, a pause, then gone. I dropped my gaze to my phone. The messages sat there unsent. How are you? Do you want to catch up? Nothing good enough to send. She went to the counter, ordered something with ease, then turned, too soon, and caught me looking again. I nodded, awkward, like we were acquaintances. She gave a small smile, nothing dramatic, but it stayed longer than it should have. When she sat down, she chose the table across from me, not near the students, not near the man with the paper. She unfolded hers, glanced once more at me, then back to the print. For a while, nothing happened. Just the scrape of chairs, the hiss of the espresso machine. I tapped my cup, wishing I had something to do with my hands. Then her voice. You're Liam's friend, aren't you? It caught me off guard. I looked up. Yeah, from school. Her lips pressed into a line, amused. Thought so. You used to come over to the house. It's been a while. And then it clicked. My friend's mom. Except the word mom didn't fit with how she looked here. Now, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, a gold ring still on her finger but loose, like it didn't quite belong anymore. I smiled, nervous. Guess I look the same? She tilted her head. Older. Quieter. A pause. Coffee suits you, though. It wasn't flirting. Not exactly. But something in the way she said it made me look away too quickly. I fiddled with the paper sleeve of my cup until it tore. We spoke in half-starts. She asked about work. I said I was between things. She said she came here sometimes after errands, then didn't explain further. I laughed once, too loud, when she joked about the rain making the coffee taste better. She laughed, too, softer, like she was laughing at me and not the weather. And then silence stretched. Comfortable, almost. She checked her phone, then folded the paper and stood. Well, nice running into you, she said, smoothing her jacket. I nodded. Yeah, you too. She left, and I sat there long after, staring at the torn paper sleeve, wondering why my chest felt tight. It wasn't until I finally picked up my phone to leave that I saw the message. From an unknown number, but signed with her name. Don't tell Liam you saw me here. This stays between us. I just sat there, the cafe suddenly too small, my coffee cold. And I knew I wouldn't forget it. The message sat in my phone like a secret I hadn't agreed to keep, though I already knew I would. I didn't see her again until a week later. I'd gone by Liam's place to drop off something he'd left in my car, a jacket, crumpled and smelling like last night's bar. She opened the door before I even knocked. Oh, it's you, she smiled, pulling the door wider. He's not here. I lifted the jacket awkwardly. Figured. Just thought I'd drop this off. Come in, then. It'll end up in the pile otherwise. I hesitated, long enough for her to notice, but stepped inside. The place looked different than I remembered. Calmer, tidier, like someone had been stripping life down to only what was necessary. She took the jacket and draped it over a chair without looking at it. Then she glanced back at me. Tea. I almost said no, but she was already filling the kettle. The quiet stretched while I stood by the counter. A framed photo of Liam at graduation leaned against the backsplash. The ring on her finger caught the light when she reached for mugs. You know, she said finally, when you all used to come over, I never imagined I'd be making tea for one of you. Years later. I chuckled under my breath. Guess it's weird. She set the mugs down, sat across from me. Not weird. Just Unexpected. Her eyes lingered on mine a beat too long before she looked away. We talked about little things at first, her work at the library, how Liam was never home, my half-hearted job search. I told her about walking around the city late at night, earbuds in, not really going anywhere. Sounds lonely, she said quietly. I shrugged. Not much lonelier than staying in. For a moment, she just stirred her tea, though she hadn't added sugar. Her hands were steady, but her voice softened. I know what that's like. The house is too quiet most nights. You find yourself inventing reasons to stay out. Grocery runs, errands you don't really need. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had to say. I watched her mouth as she spoke, then forced my eyes back to the mug. You're divorced, right? The words slipped out before I could stop them. She didn't flinch, just gave the smallest nod. 3 years now. The way she said it carried nothing and everything. I wanted to ask more, but the question lodged in my throat. Instead, I wrapped my hands around the mug though it was still too hot, and said nothing. The silence pressed down, but neither of us moved to break it. At some point she reached across to adjust the sugar jar, though it didn't need adjusting, and her fingers brushed mine. Just a graze, enough to make me look up. Her face gave nothing away. Calm, composed. Still, my pulse tripped. I told myself it meant nothing, but my hand stayed exactly where it was, waiting, hoping. She pulled hers back first, smoothed her sleeve. You should tell Liam you dropped the jacket. Otherwise he'll think it just vanished. I nodded, though the words barely registered. We lingered a while longer, neither of us saying what was obvious. She stood finally, walking me to the door. As I stepped out, the rain had started again, soft and steady. She handed me an umbrella, hers, not mine. Take it. You'll ruin your shoes. I tried to protest, but she closed my hand around it, holding it there a second too long. Our eyes met in the porch light. Nothing was said. Everything was said. I walked home under her umbrella, heart racing, the smell of her house still clinging to my jacket. And I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me that I started finding reasons to pass by her street, telling myself it was coincidence, even when it wasn't. The third time, she caught me. Twice his chance, she said, opening the door before I even knocked. 3 times? That's suspicious. I tried to laugh, but it came out thin. Just in the area. She stepped aside. Then you might as well come in. The kitchen smelled like lemon polish. Sunlight slid across the counter, catching in her hair. She poured water without asking, slid a glass toward me. Small, ordinary motions, but my eyes kept landing where they shouldn't. Her wrists, her mouth. We sat at the table. Too close this time. The scrape of my chair on the tile sounded too loud. She asked about Liam. I muttered something vague. She hummed, not pressing. Silence. Then her hand rested on the table, just inches from mine. Not touching, but close enough that I felt the heat of it. I didn't move. Couldn't. And then, footsteps. A man's voice calling from outside. Package delivery. She shot up, almost knocking her chair back. By the time she returned, the distance was back too. Arms folded, face composed. I wanted to say something, to ask what this was, but the word stuck. You should be careful, she said finally, eyes fixed on the unopened package in her hands. People notice things. My chest tightened. Like what? She looked at me then, sharp, almost warning, but softened just as quickly. Like how you linger. I opened my mouth, closed it again. My hands gripped the edge of the table. She sighed, quieter now. I shouldn't have said that. But the damage was done. My pulse hammered. I leaned forward before I knew what I was doing. Not touching. Just close, my shoulder nearly brushing hers. Her breath caught. She turned her face slightly toward mine. Our eyes locked. The air between us felt thin, dangerous. And for half a second, just half, she didn't move away. Then the clock on the wall chimed, shattering it. She stood, brisk, pulling the package against her chest like a shield. I should get back to things. I nodded, throat dry. My hands trembled as I shoved them into my pockets. On my way out, I glanced back once. She was still standing there, by the counter, not looking at me. I think she knew I almost said it. And I think she almost wanted me to. It was a Wednesday evening when I saw her outside, sitting on the bench at the corner of her street. Not dressed up, not waiting for anyone. Just sitting, hands clasped in her lap, watching the light fade. I almost walked past. Almost. But her head turned, and she caught me in that way she did, like she'd been expecting me all along. "Out for a walk?" she asked. "Yeah. You." She smiled faintly. "You could say that." I sat down, leaving a careful space between us. The bench was old, wood-worn smooth, the kind that creaked if you shifted your weight too much. For a while, we didn't speak. Cars passed. Someone's dog barked down the block. The silence between us was heavier than any sound. Finally, she said, "Liam's been talking about moving in with a friend. Across town." Oh, I tried to sound casual, but the words lodged somewhere in my throat. "That's good for him." Her fingers tightened, unclasped, tightened again. "Yes, but the house will be quiet." I stared at the pavement, tried to ignore the sharp tug in my chest. "Guess you'll have more time for yourself." She laughed once dry. "That's the problem." And then, just like that, something shifted. Her voice softened, lost its polish. "You remind me of how he used to be. Before he got so busy. You sit here, you listen, even when you don't say much." I swallowed, heat rising in my face. "Maybe I'm just not good at talking." She turned, studying me. "Or maybe you're better at noticing things." Our eyes held. Too long. Long enough for me to forget where I was. I almost said it then. That I thought about her when I shouldn't. That her texts replayed in my head at night, louder than music. But she spoke first. "Sometimes," she said, barely above a whisper, "I wonder if I've been waiting for someone to notice me again. Not as a mother. Not as a woman who used to be married. Just me." The air shifted, fragile, like glass about to crack. I forced a laugh, though my chest ached. Dangerous thing to admit. Her eyes didn't leave mine. I know. The sky had darkened by then, street lamps buzzing to life. A moth circled the light above us, frantic. I wanted to reach out, just touch her hand, just enough to close the distance, but my body froze. Instead, I said quietly, "You think Liam would understand?" She looked away, sharp this time. "Don't." Her voice carried both warning and plea. We sat in silence, both breathing shallow, both refusing to move first. Then she whispered, so soft I barely caught it. "Sometimes I wish you hadn't come by that day at the cafe." The words cut deep. I couldn't tell if she meant it, or if she meant the opposite. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, trying to hide the tremor in my hands. And yet, she turned back toward me, eyes shining with something unspoken. Her lips parted, then closed. The space between us collapsed without either of us moving. Every breath, every heartbeat said what neither of us dared. Her hand shifted an inch closer on the bench. Mine twitched, ready to meet it. The silence broke only with her voice, raw and steady. "What are we doing?" The question hung there, unanswered. And I knew whatever happened next, nothing would be the same. After that night on the bench, something shifted. Not forward, not back, just off. She stopped texting. Or maybe I stopped looking hard enough. Days passed without a word, then a week. I still walked her street sometimes, slowing near her house, but the lights were dim earlier than before. Curtains drawn, porch light off. When I did see her, once, by accident at the grocery store, she smiled like nothing had happened. A polite, small smile. Not the kind you carry home with you. "Doing all right?" she asked, hand resting lightly on the card handle. "Yeah. You?" "Fine." That was it. She turned down the next aisle without waiting for me to answer. I stood there staring at the stack of cereal boxes, wondering how a conversation could weigh more than silence. Liam mentioned her, too, in passing. Mom's been spending more time at the library, volunteering at nights. He said it casually, but I caught the undertone. Filling her time with anything but being home. One evening, I caved. I walked straight to her house, stood at the door with my hand raised to knock. Through the window, I saw her sitting at the table with a man, older than me. His laugh carried faintly through the glass, familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten. I lowered my hand, stepped back, watched her tilt her head, smile, that careful, practiced smile. Not the one I'd seen on the bench. The man leaned in, said something I couldn't hear. She reached for her glass, fingers steady. I left before I saw more. That night, my phone buzzed. A single message from her. Sorry I've been distant. Things are complicated. I typed out a dozen replies. I don't care. Tell me anyway. Do you want me to stop coming by? But every sentence felt like too much or not enough. I deleted them all. Left the screen blank. 2 days later, Liam texted. Going home for the weekend. Haven't seen Mom in a bit. My chest tightened. I couldn't tell him I'd seen her. Couldn't tell him what I didn't even understand myself. Instead, I said nothing. I stayed away. From the street, the cafe, the small excuses I used to find. But the absence filled me louder than her presence ever did. I caught myself pausing mid-step on campus, replaying the brush of her hand on mine. The sound of her voice when she'd whispered, "What are we doing?" And yet she was gone. Not gone, just withheld. Like a word stuck on the tip of the tongue. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. And so I didn't knock. Didn't send. Didn't sit at the cafe waiting. I just carried the weight of an unfinished thought. And I told myself that maybe silence was safer. It was raining again the night I found myself at her door. No excuses this time. No jacket to return, no errands nearby. Just me, soaked through, standing on her porch like I hadn't promised myself I'd stay away. When she opened the door, surprise flickered, then faded. She didn't move aside right away. You shouldn't be here, she said softly. I know. We stood there, water dripping from my hair, pooling at my shoes. The silence stretched, and then, she sighed, stepped back, let me in. The house smelled faintly of tea and something baked earlier in the day. Warmth against the cold outside. She motioned to the kitchen, and we sat across from each other, just like before. Neither of us touched the mugs. She sat down. I saw you, I said finally. My voice cracked on the words. With someone else. That night. Her shoulders tightened, then released. He's an old friend. Nothing more. I nodded, though the knot in my chest didn't ease. You shouldn't, she started, then stopped. Her hands folded, unfolded. This isn't fair to you. I don't want fair. The words came out harsher than I meant. I softened. I just want the truth. Her eyes held mine then, raw, unguarded. The truth is, I don't know what I'm doing. The admission hung there, trembling between us. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. Then say that. Don't vanish. Don't pretend like none of this happened. She laughed once, dry and shaky. You make it sound simple. Isn't it? Her gaze flicked away. To the wall clock, to the half-empty sugar jar. Anywhere but me. I'm older. I'm your friend's mother. I should know better. Maybe, I said. But knowing better doesn't change how it feels. That silenced her. The rain drummed against the window. My fingers tapped once against the mug, then stilled. Finally, she spoke again, voice low. You make me feel seen. Do you understand what that means? I swallowed hard. Yeah, because you do the same for me. Her breath caught. She pressed her hand flat on the table, then slowly slid it closer. I didn't move, waiting, until her fingertips brushed mine. It wasn't much. Just contact. But it was everything. I wanted to say more, to ask for more, but she shook her head, a small, almost invisible motion. Don't push this, she whispered. Not tonight. I nodded, though every nerve in me screamed to close the distance. We sat there like that, hands barely touching, silence louder than words. And for the first time, she smiled. Not polite, not practiced. Just small, real, tired, and alive. Okay, she asked. Okay, I answered. And that was all. Time didn't fix everything. It just blurred the sharp edges. Weeks slipped into months. Liam moved out, just like she'd said he would, and the house felt different after that. Lighter somehow. More space, more silence. I still lived down the street, and my walks past her place became less about excuses and more about routine. Sometimes I'd find her out on that same bench at dusk, hands folded in her lap, looking like she was waiting for nothing in particular. I started sitting with her, not every night, not even most nights. Just enough that it became ours. We never had a grand talk. No declarations, no sweeping gestures. The closest we came was one evening in her kitchen when she handed me a mug of tea and said quietly, "I bought the wrong kind on purpose. I knew you'd drink it." I didn't answer. I just smiled into the steam and took the first sip. She laughed under her breath, shaking her head. But she didn't take the mug back. Life with her wasn't cinematic. It was small things, carrying in her groceries, her knocking on my door with a thermos when I stayed up too late working, our walks where we never went anywhere in particular. Sometimes she'd reach across the table, not to hold my hand, but to steady it if I was fidgeting too much. Sometimes I'd glance up at the clock in her kitchen and notice it always seemed to be 8:47 a.m. when I was there, as if time itself slowed down for us. The guilt never fully vanished. Her role, the age gap, the unspoken rules we kept bending. But it softened, became background noise. What stayed louder was the quiet comfort of being seen, day after day. One night, as we walked back from the cafe, rain beginning to spit again, I joked, "Think the universe just wants us damp all the time." She nudged my arm with her elbow. "Maybe it wants to keep us honest." We stood there a moment under the streetlight, water spotting our jackets. Neither of us reached for an umbrella. We just let it happen. There was no kiss, no final confession, just the simple act of her slipping her hand into mine, easy and natural, as if it had been waiting there the whole time. And for once, I didn't overthink it. I don't remember what we talked about after that. Probably nothing important. But I remember the warmth of her hand, the quiet between us, the way the rain didn't feel cold anymore. That was enough. Enough to know we'd found something. Maybe fragile, maybe temporary, but real. And as I walked her to her door, she glanced back at me with that same small, tired smile from the kitchen months ago, the one that said more than words ever could. I smiled back. And that was all.